Perfect. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. We are going to give it a couple of minutes to allow a few more attendees to join before we begin. I feel like maybe I should have some music while we wait. Maybe for next.
Some light elevator jazz.
It's not the elevator pitch, it's the elevator music we need.
But for those of you that are just joining, we are going to wait maybe a minute or two. We have some good numbers, but let's just allow a little bit more time for people to join. Okay, it seems like we actually have a good number. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know we have people joining from different parts of the world. So yeah, let's get started. I hope everyone is having a great day or is about to have a great day. And I want to begin by thanking you all again for taking the time to join us for today's webinar. My name is Andrea Zavala. I'm an associate marketing manager here at Altrata, and we have a very exciting discussion today with some really good speakers. But before we pass it on to Valentina, I wanted to let you all know that we will have time at the end of the session for Q&A. So please use the questions function on the GoToWebinar panel to submit any questions you may have at any point during the presentation, and we'll answer them live at the end. This session will also be recorded and will be available on demand post-webinar. I believe that's everything that I wanted to cover. So if you're ready, we're ready for you, Valentina.
Thank you, Andrea, for the introduction, and a warm hello from myself as well. I am your host, Valentina Guerrini, and this is the third webinar of the Altrata Academy Fundraising Academy series, where we develop this discussion predominantly based on what you are asking us to talk about. And this week we're going to be addressing international fundraising, the complexities of finding major donors, high net worth donors around the globe, and how to do this effectively. And I really could not do this alone. So this week I'm joined by Chapel in York, and Nancy Bixon and Emily Compagnie. I'll introduce them briefly, but really this webinar stemmed from an event that we had last week in Paris, where we hosted a get-together of various universities, schools, healthcare organizations or charities that were fundraising internationally. We had a panel discussion where we addressed all the topics that we're going to go through today, but we wanted to make sure that that wasn't restricted to just four walls at the venue, but that we made it available to anyone that is also thinking of embarking on international philanthropy or is already doing it and might have some challenges to overcome. So it is a complex topic from a resource perspective, from a governance perspective, and from a relationship building perspective. So in order to unpack this topic, I'm joined by Emily, our first guest. I've actually met Emily the first time in Paris last week, and she told me a little bit about our history. She's been working in fundraising for the last 15 years, both in terms of actually fundraising, but then also project creation. She's the founder of EC Consulting, a firm based in Geneva, and is also on the board of Chapel in York, Switzerland office, and member of their fundraising expert panel. I've learned of Emily that she has worked with various international organizations and has done fundraising and has worked with organizations in East Africa. I believe you also lived there for a while. Love to hear those stories, as well as Switzerland and Canada. So thank you so much for joining us, Emily.
Thank you so much, Valentina, and hello to everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Beautiful. So to get the audience to know you a little bit better, I'm just curious, as we're talking about international philanthropy, can you tell us a little bit about how fundraising internationally has shaped the work that you do?
I think it's been quite organic in my professional background, because I'm a French citizen, but I've lived in different countries, as you have mentioned. So I've worked as a donor in East Africa, so I have a good knowledge of East Africa. But I've also seen like all the challenges and faced by local grassroots organizations. I've also worked in Canada for a big foundation, the One Drop Foundation, which was very interesting because on a fundraising point of view, I could really see like the differences between France, for instance, and the US, Canada market. The way they're approaching fundraising is totally different. The culture is different, the mindset, the approach to money is different. So it was very, very interesting to see. And now I've been based in Geneva in Switzerland for the past almost 10 years now. And that's, again, another market very different from the neighboring countries such as France and Germany, for instance. So it's basically, as moving around, it's been a lot of learning for me in terms of what is the reality of international fundraising.
Beautiful, and we're really going to unpick all of that in just a moment throughout the webinar. So great to have you. And then I also have, I'm also joined by Nancy Bixson. I've actually met Nancy probably about 5 years ago at a beautiful lunch that she hosted, and I was struck by her wisdom, and she actually founded Chapel in York. She's a lawyer for over 40 years, but I've heard you say many times, don't hold it against me. And she has also lived in the UK, United States, Australia, and France, and she's worked with various organizations in the fundraising world, predominantly working on both the legal and the fundraising capacity, specializing in cross-border work. I have to say this fun fact about you, Nancy, but you live in a home that was built in the 1557, I believe, which is I think the one we're seeing now.
Yes.
Well, it's great to have you, and thank you for being part of this.
Thank you very much for having me. It's really an area which is very close to my heart. We've been doing this for almost 30 years now, and have seen a lot of changes and a lot of opportunities. So thank you for bringing this to the wider world.
Beautiful. And actually on that, do you want to share with the audience how Chapel in York was set up, what prompted it, and why did you see a gap in the industry for this type of work on international philanthropy?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. Well, we actually started Chapel in York with the idea of helping people fundraise from America. There was a number of organizations that wanted to set up 501c3s, which is the American charity designation. And as a lawyer, I knew I could do it and do it well. And there was also a real need to help people run them. And run them effectively, because there was so much problems and mistakes, and but it was everything from we need an address to we need a tax return done to whatever. So we knew we could do that, and so that was one of the things that we started out with. And then as the world changed, we also knew that there was a need throughout the world to help people tax effectively get funds through. And so that's when we started setting up our own foundations around the world to partner with organizations to offer that benefit. So it's been an interesting time, and in nearly 30 years, there's been a lot of change and a lot of things that I think should be done now versus what we did 30 years ago.
That's actually an interesting key point that we have to go through during this talk, right? How is the landscape changed? Why is this such a massive topic right now, and kind of the trends that you're seeing? So I'm going to pick your brain on that as well. But before we dive into specific questions, let me just set the stage as to why we're talking about this topic so much. We hear globalization all the time, but what really we're talking about today are a new era of global citizens in the area of high net worth individuals. And I like to bring some statistics to surface what is the reality. And at Altrata, we're studying who are the high net worth individuals around the world. And as a consequence, we look at where they live, the geographies that they touch, the businesses that they have, and the geographies that they touch as well. So from a residence perspective, just some fun fact for you, 15% of ultra high net worth individuals, second home owners in London, have their primary business in France. Look at that crossover. In fact, we see a lot of French universities that are doing monthly trips to the UK and raising funds with their alumni, the alumni network there. 20% of Dutch ultra high net worth business owners have a second home in Dubai. So we see a lot of cross-border travel there as well. Another aspect to consider is family influence. So we've been talking about the wealth transfer. 3.9 trillion wealth transfer is what we've estimated in our reports will happen over the next decade. And so engaging donors' family early is crucial. And we see that these families often have global residences. And a good example, which I might bring up multiple times in this conversation, is the UNICEF International Council. They've set up a council of big donors that give above, I think it's the 15 million mark, and they meet once a year. And one of the key I would say benefits of these donors to even join that club is to meet other people from around the world that have this level of influence, and they do it with their families. They bring their kids in, and so they're really thinking of the longevity of the gift. A third aspect is networks and associations. So again, looking at our data, we see that on average, a high net worth individual has about 23 known associates. Known associates are connections that could be board affiliations, personal connections, and we see that these again are international. So think about when we think about networking and accessing a new network in a city, potentially you have more global network than you think, and so being able to assess that early. What we've also talked about a lot in previous webinars is the next generation of wealthy individuals, how they give differently, and we're really seeing that these are the global citizens of our last decades. They're much more digitally connected, and they're focused much more on social and environmental impact. So what does this mean? As a fundraiser, to engage these new ways of philanthropists, it's much more about building lasting relationships. So the complexities of being able to do this internationally, who do you have within that country that can represent you, or how often do you need to travel, is the expectation within the organization set that you can have this type of travel, so all these type of considerations, and also being able to offer personalized interactions that reflect donor values and the global outlook. So being able to build that relationship and customize it. So as we think about international philanthropy, let's take a step back. And as an organization, let's think, is it the right fit for me? Is it the right strategy for me? So Nancy, I'm looking at you because I know that you help a lot of organizations make this assessment. And what are the things that you look out for in terms of qualifying an organization? Are they ready for that step?
Thank you for that. This is such an important thing because we get so many organizations that say, you know, we want to do fundraising in another country. Can you help us, you know, with a fund membership or a charity? And it's the wrong question. The real question is, and it's one that I know that you deal with and need to deal with a lot, which is, why do I want to do this? It's because we think there's a lot of money in America, but we don't know anyone there. Is that a good use of your time and money? Because it's expensive. It's not inexpensive to fundraise in another country. Same thing with, you know, there's lots of foundations that will give money, but we've never got any money from trusts and foundations locally. You know, are you really, you know, starting out with the right answer? It's expensive, and if you don't have anywhere, if you're starting absolutely from scratch, it's even more expensive, it's time consuming, and it is so important to think through, why would anybody want to give us money? Is it that, you know, and sometimes there's lots of reasons, but they're often very different from the reasons why people locally will be interested in you. The cathedral is going to have people who are interested in old buildings, potentially people who are interested in religion, and people who might be interested in the country where the cathedral is. So there might be three completely different constituent groups that you would be looking at with three very different ways of addressing them. But the reason to do it is not, I would say, because you're having trouble locally. If you're having trouble with your fundraising, fundraising internationally will not plug that gap. And you really ought to be thinking through, why am I having trouble? What's the problem? Because it's when you're successful and you're understanding where you are as an organization and who your constituent parts are and what your message is, that's when you will be more successful. And no matter what the facts and figures are, they don't mean anything. What's important is what is useful for you, because your appeal, your connections, your ability to connect with those people, your time. Do you have time? Do you have money? Often you need both. A lot of money, you can throw a lot of money at it and be successful without needing to put much time or resource or people resource into it. But then you've got to be willing to see whether you have an achievable ROI and a necessary ROI. We have so many organizations. I mean, thinking of a really important organization from Italy, actually, that has been doing things abroad, and they've had a negative ROI for years because what they've been planning to do works. They get people there, they do various things, but they never actually saw it in the same way as they would locally, which is, why are we doing this, and what's the point of it? And that is just so necessary. Please don't check your brains at the airport. What's good fundraising locally is good fundraising abroad. It doesn't suddenly change because you're in another country.
I love what you're saying, and I'm gonna add maybe one of my most used sentences. I also put it on my LinkedIn profile, but there's art to relationship building, and then there's science to actually creating a systematic, functioning strategy. And I see so often organizations start with the art, and they might have an amazing introducer or an amazing board, and they get driven by the excitement of being able to raise funds internationally, but then they don't have that structure or strategy, and so the ROI might just last 3-4 months, but it does not create that longevity that you need. And so that long-term planning is also important. You touched on it briefly, but I just want to go through it. One of the most frequently asked questions I get is, how do I create a compelling funding proposal, compelling case for support? Do you have any advice on considerations that can be done or should be considerations for that international setting?
It has got to be about why someone externally is going to give you money. What is the appeal? And as I say, for example, the cathedral has 3 different cases for support, really, because you're going to 3 different types of organizations. But what you have locally is probably not going to work in another country because there's such a different engagement for those people than it is locally. So ensure you've really thought through why people, why should they give to you and not to a local charity? I mean, it may be because obviously you're doing things that there aren't national or local charities dealing with. That's quite straightforward. But the pressure of people to support local things is so huge that you really have to be very clear as to what your appeal is to that wider thing. And it may be different in different countries. So if you have a lot of expats living in one country, that may be your appeal to expats in that country. Whereas again, if you have a country where people just love you, and there are lots of those around, then you may have a lot of people that that have a very different approach. So that to me is the most significant thing, is really thinking through and understanding what that is for your organization.
I appreciate you saying this, and I wonder sometimes what comes first. I see organizations first building the case for support and then going out to their audience and saying, this is what it is. And I've seen organizations actually finding or understanding who is their audience first, and then crafting the case for support around the interest and potential, what gets those individuals excited, and asking, right? Comparing, testing it, making sure that you have that flexibility to craft the right communication strategy for the audience that you're proposing it to.
I just want to jump in, Valentina, if I may, to add a few points on the great insights that you've given, both you and Nancy. On the decision of should I go to international fundraising, just wanted to mention a very simple tool, actually, that I'm sure everybody knows, is doing a SWOT analysis, so strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So really taking time, as Nancy was very rightfully saying, really take time to consider, okay, should I actually go into international fundraising or not, and really taking the time to see, okay, what are my strengths at the moment, what are my weaknesses if I want to go into international fundraising, would there be any opportunities, or what are the threats? So considering, again, what Nancy said about time, resources, allocation, money, and so on. And perhaps to add on the, if I may, on the second point regarding the narrative, again, I join Nancy on thinking about why would people give to you, and I would say it's also about what is your unique selling point, what is your USP. So really thinking about what is your added value, what do you bring to the country you want to target, and what difference do you make compared to other local organizations that are active in the same field. So it's also important to do a benchmarking before to know who is also active in the same, on the same topic that you're covering, and thinking in terms of positioning and communication efforts, and have your arguments very clearly in mind.
I love it. So to the point, simplicity, and make it count, and make it unique. So that drives us very well into the idea of, okay, let's say I'm ready for international fundraising. I've done my SWOT analysis. I know my USP. I know this market is the right market for me. Who do I go to? Who do I show my funding, my case for support? Who is the right audience for me? So it's one of the most common questions that we got from the event is, how do I identify the right potential donors? Where do I start? So to this, we actually have a poll, if I'm not mistaken. Andrea is gonna launch it. We're curious to hear what you're seeing, what you are doing. Is it looking within your existing network? Is it leveraging, of course, when we say networks, it's your existing board members? Is it creating a board over there? Is it looking within your existing donor base? Maybe your existing donors, major donors, look at their connections in those markets. Is it looking at external donor databases? So being able to find new donors that have a particular affinity to that cause, and doing a research that way. Is it none of the above? Are you showing us a new way of doing things? So we're gonna go through these poll results, and actually they're coming in. The top one is existing donor base, which is excellent, right? Because again, that goes back to what we were saying earlier, that individuals of this level are international. Going up to them and saying, I know that you're connected in this geography. We're thinking of launching a campaign there. Can you support us? And then there's probably about a 50-50 split between networks and external prospecting, okay? Which shows the strength of both. I think I agree. I see both quite equally. You either decide to go down the network route, or you feel that maybe your network isn't strong enough and you decide to really find new prospects that have that strong affinity, and then really building an engagement strategy, trying to get to them with a cold contact, and maybe going by or accessing the networks that they're used to accessing in that geography. So that's interesting. And then thank you everyone that joined the poll. I would say also, when we're thinking of prioritizing prospects, in my view, it's a mix of all of it. Okay, to me, it's a mix of it all. So being able to look for the individuals that are closer to you, so that's your donors, and those are the ones that you already built a relationship. Prioritize those that then are actually philanthropic and have connections in that area. So ideally, what we see, especially now recently with the advancement of data and research, is that we can make specific asks. Imagine going to an existing donor and saying, I realize that you are connected to this individual based, let's pretend, in New York. This person sits on 4 different boards of organizations that operate in a similar area. And this person actually has a second home in my geography, so potentially spends a lot of time in my home country. Imagine the power of asking for something so specific and justifying why you're making that ask. This is something that potentially 15 years ago was not possible. Now we're taking the guesswork out and we're really making sure that we can be as strategic with our ask. And so this is really something that I'm seeing a lot in recent years. Nancy, Emily, anything to add to this? Anything that you've seen in your experience of how you prioritize prospects?
So Nancy, you want to go first? Or?
No, please.
Okay. So perhaps on identifying prospects, I wanted to mention a few things, because we know like the usual ways of identifying prospects, and we've mentioned already benchmarking, for instance, so looking at other organizations in the same field to know how they are funded. You've mentioned, Valentina, the networks or board network, for instance. It could be about creating a circle of ambassadors in the country, cold prospections, or getting access to external database. But there are a few things that are also, I think, interesting to consider. So first thing is, especially when you don't know a country and you want to kind of, try and test, see whether it would be a good fit for you, it could be collaborating with another organization that is local to the country you're targeting. It happened to me with one of my clients, especially in the US. So they had a partnership with another organization, and it was a great partnership, but there was like confidence between the two organizations, and the organization that was based in the US, for instance, was very open-minded in terms of, we're going to, lead and explain to you how it works, so you can get used to, requesting funds from the government, for instance, and so on. So I also did it for like an organization based in Switzerland with another organization based in France. So I think it's really a win-win, because you bring both expertise together. So even in terms of projects or programmatic delivery, you can build something that is impactful, and you benefit from the knowledge of the organization in this country. So I think that's a very interesting way it's a very different way, let's say, of approaching things. It could also be events, for instance. So I think it's very important to be visible on the international scene. There are many international events and summits and conferences and so on very different topics. And most of the time you also have donors coming to these events. So it's a great way, I think, to identify people, organization you might be willing to talk to or approach. That might be also, for instance, having your current donors recommending other donors or contacts abroad, because now we see, especially in philanthropy, but I think it's true even for corporations and governments. I mean, everyone works together, and you've mentioned it very clearly, Valentina, in your introduction. Like, everything is globalized at the moment, and it's the same, and we see it more and more often with foundations. So foundation in Switzerland, most of the time they know other people from foundations in other countries, in the US, in France, in Germany, whatever. So they may have contact or organization they could recommend, for instance. And perhaps the very last point on the embassies network. So it's also good to look in at the network of embassies in different countries. And it could be for some organization, if some of you have local teams, for instance, you could also consider doing international fundraising a little bit differently. And for instance, engage your local team in fundraising efforts through capacity building and ask them to contribute also to fundraising efforts in the country and where you have your programs, for instance. In terms of prioritization, it's well, it's in terms of the type of target that you have, it's very strategic. So for me, it really depends on what is your fundraising strategy for that. So do you want to go especially to high net worth individual, corporations, foundations, governments, whatever. So for me, that's part, it's a bigger question and bigger answer because it's really part of the fundraising strategy. And then to prioritize, I would always say go where you have possibility to have interactions, direct contact, discuss potential collaborations, because that's always when there is like a link and a human relationship that you have more chances of getting somewhere, I think.
I love it, absolutely. And it's not just about well, I would say sometimes there's almost too much opportunity, right? There's just, and the hard thing is to focus, is to narrow it down to what do I as an organization have time to do? Where are my best chances of actually getting in front of the right people? And when I say right people, those are the ones that could actually convert quicker and are more likely to say yes. So having that reflection period at the beginning, whether it be SWOT analysis, benchmarking, internal assessment, will ultimately allow us to narrow down the timeline for that engagement piece as well. Excellent segue. Excellent segue. Thank you, Emily, because we talked about the who, we talked about how to engage with them. Nancy, I really want to talk about two things with you. One is the governance. So how can our organization be ready in managing prospects around the world? And the second one is really how can the structure of the organization be ready in receiving donations from around the world? What are your insights on this?
Well, I think we're talking sort of the tax and legal side, which always sounds like the most boring. So I'll try to make it sound a little bit less boring. Generally, in a lot of countries that you might be interested in, there are tax benefits for giving to charities. Not everywhere, and a lot of the world actually, if money leaves the country, any tax benefits that are available are not available for international donations. But for those that are, and we're talking North America, Canada, US, a lot of Europe, Hong Kong, oddly in bits of Singapore, although there's there's a lot of enthusiasm, but it's quite bitty in terms of how that works. It's worth being able to, if possible, organize yourself so that you can offer a tax benefit. The reason why is because you're in enough competition as it is for the philanthropic dollar, yen, pound, etc. And so you don't want anybody to say no to you because you haven't given them the benefit. Now, sometimes there's no problem. They'll just say they'll write a check, they'll make the transfer, absolutely no problem. But particularly once you get into the bigger donation area, once you get into some of the legal things of donors giving, example from donor advised funds in some countries, it is at least ensuring that you have the opportunity to say to those people that that you can offer local tax benefits. And I would, by the way, mention, because people don't know, and it's really worth knowing, if you have any interest in the UK, we have something here called gift aid, which means that you, as the recipient, gets 25% more for a donation. So if somebody gives you £100, the government will give you another £25 on that donation. So I won't tell you any more about that, but it's really, really an important thing, which a lot of people don't know about, the benefits to the recipient charity more so than to the donor. But you generally have a couple of options in terms of how to be able to offer a charitable donation to either usually individuals or companies, or sometimes legal issues for donations from foundations or donor advised funds. That is partnering with a local charity, which could work and sometimes does. I think it probably is not the best option in some jurisdictions where there's other options, because that really, once you start getting into money, you start running into problems. You can set up your own legal entity in that country. People do this a lot in the States. They do it a lot in Hong Kong. My own view is, having done this for dozens and dozens and dozens of years, that it is becoming so difficult to run an organization. The regulatory regimes are becoming so tight on stuff. And the most difficult thing is banking, trying to get bank accounts and deal with bank accounts in country, that if there are other alternatives, it's worth at least seriously looking at them. If you're just looking at going to another country as a fundraising option. If you're trying to do business and actually run programs, that's a whole different ballgame. But if we're talking about just fundraising, I would seriously look at whether you could. There are intermediary organizations out there that would be useful. We have them in 6 countries. King Baudouin Foundation has them in another of countries. CAF America's got them in a bunch of countries. There's a number of solutions out there. And what those usually mean is that you can offer the tax and legal benefits without having to run a charity. So rather than setting up your own bank, you're going to be having a bank account, basically. There's pros and cons to both of those things. And I'm happy to send anybody, if that you want a sheet about it, something that will go into that. But to me, particularly with some of the banking issues and some of the regulatory issues, due diligence issues, 2-factor authorization issues, letting somebody else do the regulatory stuff is really useful. It's worth knowing about Transnational Giving Europe, which is a way of moving money around Europe tax effectively. I was on the team that set it up. It's not brilliant all the time, but it at least is another option. To me, that is probably the best way forwards in most things. It's not necessary, again, if somebody wants to give you money, but it is really useful to know that something, to be able to offer that to donors. I think that to me is the most crucial bit of this, which is just that it is the back end. It's not where you start your international fundraising. It is the back end to make sure that you're offering this. But I think it probably is something, at least in certain markets, certainly in America, certainly in lots of the UK, Europe, even in Hong Kong, even though the tax rate is only 17%. Again, it just shows that you've thought through what you're doing and made provision for people who want to give from that country.
It has to be as easy as possible to give. And the sooner you think about that, the better impact it will have on the strategy. I'm just gonna finish it up with, closing the circle. We talked about, should you do it? Why? What is your why? Who to connect with? How to connect with them? How to channel the gift? I'm just gonna close the circle with should you accept a donation? This is also a question to be asked, especially as you're raising funds in different parts of the world. The money is traveling, has been, maybe the questionable sources of wealth. And from our perspective, we've seen due diligence research that predominantly was done by the regulated sector, so banks and casinos. In the last probably 5 to 10 years, it's completely flipped. And now it's predominantly the philanthropic sector that is coming to us asking for due diligence on individuals of all parts of the world. And the reason why it's even more relevant in international philanthropy is because you don't have the language expertise to be able to go in and look at all the different risk factors tied to an individual, to a company, to a foundation. So think of that consideration as well. What is your gift acceptance policy? How will you look into the sources of wealth of various donors that you're engaging with and hopefully will end up giving? Because international philanthropy also exposes you to a more international risk. And so it's also important to keep that consideration in. We're almost at time. I just want to leave this open floor. Emily, Nancy, any final comments or anything that we didn't touch on today that the audience absolutely needs to know about?
I would say that for me, when it comes to international fundraising, it's really important to take a step-by-step approach. So it's not because you say, okay, I'm going to raise funds, I don't know, in the US or in Switzerland, that you go all in, all the resources, all the staff, all the whatever you need. It could really be like just, exploring, testing, trying it out. So really having a step-by-step approach. So you take less risks than just betting all in, and just see whether this is something that is going to work out for you or not. Also consider what is I would say collateral of the fundraising aspects. So for instance, we haven't mentioned, but I think it's very important, so that's why I'm going back on it. It's thought leadership. So really investing on efforts for your organization to be visible, for the expertise that you have to be known. So it's everything that you can do beside direct fundraising. So it's communication, it's positioning, it's attending events, participating in events, speaking to events, writing, blog, study, whatever, to really show what is the expertise that you have. So I would just end up with these 2 points.
Well, I've got 3 tiny quick stories to tell you. One is about a charity in Boston, in Lincolnshire in the UK, that wanted to fundraise from Boston in the US. And the answer was absolutely not. What's the point? You know, there's millions of people there, but they, the cost of trying to find the people who might be interested in you just because you share the same name doesn't work. On the other hand, we had people from the Welsh Red Cross that wanted to fundraise. These are all America, sorry, but it's true everywhere. That wanted to fundraise in America, and we said, you've got to be crazy. There's an American Red Cross. Why do you want something in America? And it turned out that every Welsh actor and singer that does things in America, from Catherine Zeta-Jones to Tom Jones to etc., all suggest money go to the Welsh Red Cross. So they actually had a huge pipeline of money. And finally, there was a hospice that from Glasgow that wanted to fundraise in America. And they put on an event in New York City and raised $1 million that night. That was their only engagement. They brought every Scottish painter and things to do things that they could auction off. And they were hugely, obviously successful, but they knew what they were doing. They didn't do anything else. That was what they wanted to do. And it was a great success. So the amount of possibilities and what works for your organization is absolutely crucial, that you understand it and that you do what's best for yourself.
Beautiful. Isn't it great when we actually get to hear the stories and put this discussion into context? So as we open up for questions, let me just say a big thank you to Emily and Nancy for joining us, being able to share the insights from the Paris event to a wider audience. We're going to try and produce some written collateral as well, if people want to go home with some of these takeaways from this webinar. And as always, if you're thinking of additional topics, things you just want to know about in the fundraising world, reach out to us, and we're defining the next sessions of webinars, and so your feedback is always appreciated. So Andrea, how are we with questions?
I was talking and realized I was muted, but thank you all 3 for sharing your insights. And we do have a couple great questions come through, so we can go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first one is: having an alumni pool globally sufficient reason to fundraise internationally?
Let me perhaps start with this, since we're talking about research. So I would say that the research, your database will tell you the answer to that, right? it's not just about having alumni internationally, it's about assessing the quality of those alumni in terms of prospects. Are those alumni actually philanthropic? Are they engaged with other organizations? Are they spread out, or do you have hubs that host a lot of interesting alumni prospects? So being able to have a clear assessment of that, working with the alumni community team, being able to have ambassadors in those geographies to also vet that information and give you insights whether these are actually potential philanthropists, really will help you drive that decision. So one of the points that I think came across from this session today is let the research, the assessment that you do internally drive the strategy for your next steps. Don't think this is what I should be doing. Really look at the data first, and it will tell the picture of what your next move should be. Emily, Nancy, anything else on that?
I think it's a great answer.
Yeah, I agree with you, Valentina. It's really about checking the level of engagement of your community, because I know many organizations with great alumni network in terms of number, but they have no or very little interaction, or where they send out emails or thing, it just basically nothing happens. So if that's the case, then no, definitely they're not an asset. But for some organization, they have, you know, committed network of alumni, and then in that case, you have possibilities that you could consider.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Let's move on to the next question. Do you have any tips for smaller organizations without large teams? And how can they access resources to identify and engage international donors?
I can talk about what we do at on this. When I speak to charities, sometimes it's a one-woman show doing everything, or a one-man show doing fundraising, marketing, communication, donor management, everything. And they just have targets to, you know, find 5 new donors. And so we have essentially, we provide access to our portal, to our platform that helps identify the donors based on wealth, liquidity, based on philanthropic propensity, based on how easy it is to engage with them via networks. And so we're able to identify the right donors, and the package ultimately reflects the size of the organization. So an organization with 50 fundraisers and 10 researchers will be on a different license compared to that one-woman show that needs, you know, 5 donors a year. So there's a lot of scalability when we talk about research and data, because we customize it to the various tiers in the industry.
For me, it would go back to strategic thinking, really. So I work also with a lot of small and medium-sized organizations, and I see so often this type of organization with no fundraising strategy. And I would really emphasize that it's not because you're a small organization that you should not have a fundraising strategy. And it's even more important because this is where you will really have priorities, and you will focus on where you have most chances, and you will also assess your resource allocations and so on. So for me, it goes back to whether this is just fundraising, local fundraising, or international fundraising. It goes back to your fundraising strategy. So is it strategic for you? Because you have, I don't know, 1, 2 board members based abroad, and they are very into like supporting the organization, supporting you with fundraising efforts and so on. And then you would, you know, consider fundraising in another country. Or not, because as Nancy said, also you are not doing good in fundraising locally. So it's really going back to all this strategic question and not rushing into getting into another country if you're not sure that it's going to be at least a priority for you in terms of let's say goal and resources.
I think that's a really important, those are all very important points. I mean, the reality is, if you're uncertain, if you don't have a plan, if you haven't done, if it doesn't feel obvious, don't do it. But that's true of whether you're tiny or if you're huge.
Perfect. Let's move on to the next question. How do we best stay abreast of news/changes in international charity law if we can't afford to bring on a specialized lawyer?
Well, as a specialized lawyer, watch this space. I mean, I think it's quite difficult to follow laws of every country. I think what is more important is what countries are you thinking about, what do you need to know, what is important in that country. I mean, obviously now we're all looking at what's happening in America with Donald Trump and, for example, USAID's going. But I think that I think I wouldn't try to stay abreast of legal changes. I think I would be spending my time thinking about where am I engaging, and then ensuring that you understand what's going on in the places where you are. And that should be either, you're going to have something there generally. It's either, and this is also, by the way, a good time to ask, a good thing to ask your local people, stakeholders, whether it's your alumni, ask them. They'll know what's going on if there's legal changes regarding philanthropy and things. If there's legal changes regarding banks, well, it's almost impossible to figure out what's going on. But I think that your best people to talk to in a country without having to spend any money is probably your stakeholders in that country.
I second that completely. And if you think of what really impacted the charity space in the last 5 years potentially has been the changes in data protection laws, and how each country has different regulations on data protection. And what I see now is that there's a lot of transparency on this, and you can go on websites of other charities and see how they're communicating with their donors and how they've updated their privacy policy, which is an effective way of kind of emulating good examples without the need of investment in specialized lawyers. So I would say that there's always someone out there that has the same questions, and charities that are dealing with the same points. So it's good to research and find that benchmark.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We have several questions sort of asking the same, but people are wondering what databases are currently reliable for donor research at a global scale.
Well, what I can say is, being in the space of database on high net worth individuals, the landscape is evolving, right? There is a lot of aggregation of data out there, where it's essentially collecting information in a systematic way from various public sources. This is done on foundations, this is done on individuals, it's done on companies. The position that we've taken as Altrata is, we know that whilst that's very helpful and useful and necessary, when it comes to, in particular, high net worth research, so information on the individual, quality goes always over, or wins over, quantity, because we cannot afford a mistake in being able to assess the wealth, or being able to know who an individual is and their background or quotes that they've done. So as an organization, we still very much prioritize the hand-curated nature of information on high net worth individuals, by then also adding some of that automation in order to cover the volume. So we've been, and that's probably the history of now Altrata. It used to be WealthX, now it's Altrata. That is a new business created after 5 data businesses were acquired. And ultimately the goal is really not just to have one data point on an individual, such as wealth. Originally, it was all about just finding wealthy people. Now we know that because time is scarce, resources aren't many, we really have to make sure that it's not just wealth, it's philanthropic affinity, and it's how easy it is to connect with this person based on the fact that they're close to my network. So we're really moving in the direction of channeling multiple data points in an assessment to find few but the best prospects to engage with.
I definitely agree with you, Valentina. Like, quality is better than quantity, and having worked with 1 or 2 databases that I don't even remember the names, but be careful with companies saying like, okay, we'll provide 1,000 prospects and you can work with that, because most of the time you can just throw, I'd say 90% of the list into the bin. So definitely quality before quantity.
Agreed.
Okay, perfect. We do have a couple more questions, but they're kind of specific, so I like to their situation. So I'm going to share that with our speakers later so they can get in contact with them and answer any questions that they may have. We also have people asking for contact information. So here it is. As I mentioned earlier, everybody will receive a recording of the webinar. This will also be available on demand on our website. But we appreciate you all for joining us today. And I don't know if our speakers have any closing remarks, but yeah, thank you all for joining us.
Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. And thank you so much for joining, Emily, Nancy. Thank you so much. It's been insightful and more to come. So watch this space.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for a lovely day.
Have a good one.
Bye, everyone.